Good morning, everyone. Today we're doing a presentation on fast fashion. Here is the table of contents. Firstly, the introduction. What is fast fashion? Well, fast fashion refers to the business model of rapidly producing inexpensive clothing designs to quickly get them to the market to respond to the latest trends. This has led to a culture of overconsumption, where people buy more clothes than they need and discard them quickly, as if they were disposable items with no lasting value. In fact, clothes are durable goods that should not be mindlessly wasted. How many of you here have bought fast fashion items before? Wow, it looks like most of you as consumers have contributed to the problems of fast fashion. But the responsibility doesn't lie with consumers alone. Today, I want to draw your attention to three issues and discuss how different stakeholders, including consumers, brands, and governments, can work together to address them. Firstly, the labour rights problems in producing countries. Second, environmental problems in producing countries. And third, environmental problems in the consuming countries. These issues have arisen due to the rapid growth of the fast fashion industry. In fact, the fast fashion industry is projected to double from 2022 to 2027, growing from 91.23 billion USD in 2022 to 184.96 billion in 2027. This expansion has been dominated by brands like H&M, Zara, and Shein. Next, I will pass over to my partner Michelle, who will go through the problems of this issue.
Garment workers in fast fashion producing countries face severe labor rights issues, including wage theft and inadequate compensation. Many have experienced non-payment of wages, layoffs, and earnings far below a living wage during the pandemic. In fact, 99% of Bangladeshi workers have experienced non-payment of rightful earnings. Workers also endure poor conditions and are forced to work 96-hour weeks, exceeding international standards. Brands must be held accountable, and governments need stronger labor protections. Even after leaving the factory, workers in fast fashion producing countries cannot escape the impact of the industry. The toxic wastewater typically dumped near garment facilities contaminates local agriculture, fisheries, and drinking water sources. Textile dyes have been detected in nearby fruits and vegetables, posing health risks to consumers. In fact, the environmental devastation from fast fashion impacts entire communities, not just the factory workers. And the problems don't stop there. The garment production process itself exposes workers to various health hazards. Baker et al. 2018 highlight respiratory dangers like cotton dust and synthetic air particulates, as well as pollution hazards from heavy metals and toxins in untreated wastewater discharge. In fact, a survey of Bangladeshi garment workers found that 55% reported respiratory complications due to constant exposure to these substances in the factory. Turning now to the environmental impacts in consuming countries. The demand for fast fashion has been ever increasing, with the industry producing up to 100 billion new garments per year. This consumes vast amounts of water and emits more carbon than all international flights and shipping combined. Globally, clothing consumption has increased by 60% over the past 20 years, reaching 56 million tons annually. Despite this surge in clothing consumption, the recycling rate remains extremely low. The rest of the used clothing ends up in landfills, where microplastics from the fabrics leach into the soil and waterways. In Hong Kong, textile waste has risen 32.4% over the past decade. Yet, only 0.4% of textiles were recovered for recycling.
The environmental and occupational impacts of fast fashion are simply devastating. The toxic waste, dangerous work conditions, unsustainable consumption, and wasteful practices are destroying local communities and putting workers' lives at risk. Brands, governments, and all of us as consumers have a responsibility to address these key issues. We must act now to address the critical issue of labour rights in the fast fashion industry. The conditions faced by garment workers in producing countries are absolutely unacceptable. Wage theft, low wages, unsafe workplaces, and excessive hours that defy all human decency. These exploitative practices cannot continue. Governments and fashion brands must come together immediately to protect these workers and ensure fair, livable wages and healthy, safe work environments. We need stronger labour regulations, robust worker empowerment programs, and true partnerships between brands, suppliers, and worker advocacy groups. Anything less is an absolute travesty that we cannot tolerate. Furthermore, we must demand comprehensive transparency and traceability throughout these complex supply chains. Fashion brands cannot be allowed to hide behind a veil of secrecy. They must be required to publicly disclose information about their factories, work conditions, and environmental impact. This enhanced transparency is the only way to hold these companies truly accountable and drive the meaningful improvements that are so desperately needed. And when it comes to sourcing practices, the time for half measures has passed. Brands must source exclusively from suppliers using eco-friendly, sustainable methods, organic, recycled and biodegradable materials, reduced resource consumption, and effective waste management. And these suppliers must obtain rigorous certifications like the EU Ecolabel to prove their sustainability credentials. Governments have a crucial role to play here, enacting policies and providing financial incentives that compel brands to embrace a true circular economy model, focusing on reuse, repair, and recycling. Finally, we, the consumers, must step up and take responsibility. We can no longer continue feeding the unsustainable beast of fast fashion through our mindless consumption. We must break this vicious cycle by buying only what we need, repairing and prolonging the life of our clothing, donating clothing, and choosing sustainable options whenever possible. And in regions with limited access to green fashion, we must get creative, altering, repairing, and upcycling our garments to reduce waste. The environmental and social devastation wrought by fast fashion cannot be allowed to continue unabated. We must take action and demand change across every facet of this industry. Labour rights, supply chain transparency, sustainable sourcing, and consumer behaviour. Only then can we truly mitigate the catastrophic impacts of fast fashion and build a more just, equitable, and environmentally conscious future. And now I'd like to pass on to Michelle, who will share our reflection on the research process we undertook.
As young consumers, we were compelled to focus our research on the critical issues surrounding the fast fashion industry. We've all contributed to its unsustainable practices through our purchasing habits, and the alarming news reports have struck a chord. The mountains of textile waste piling up in landfills, as well as the devastating ocean pollution from fast fashion, have made it clear that drastic action is needed. In our initial research, we attempted to cover a range of challenges, from labor exploitation to environmental devastation. However, in retrospect, we feel we may have bitten off more than we could chew. Going forward, we believe it would be more impactful to narrow our focus to a single critical area, such as the abhorrent work conditions and poverty wages faced by government workers. This would allow us to provide more in-depth analysis and propose targeted solutions. While we've amassed evidence to support our original points, a more focused approach may be more effective in driving change. One key challenge was identifying concrete steps governments can take to protect workers and hold brands accountable. Many sources discuss the need for transparency and stronger regulations, but specifics of implementation and enforcement seem elusive. The patchwork of local, national, and international laws also makes it difficult to propose a unified framework. This underscores the complexities involved and the significant work that remains. Nevertheless, this research has been profoundly eye-opening, fundamentally shifting our own consumption habits. Going forward, we are committed to being more selective, thoughtful, and sustainable in our purchases, and to using our voices to demand systemic change. This is not an easy task, but the stakes are too high to continue with business as usual. We are eager to refine our approach and redouble our efforts to drive the critical reforms that are so urgently needed. Thank you for your time. We'd be happy to take any questions you may have now.
Also, here is the list of references that we used in our research. Thank you.